So there are so many words, so many buzzwords that were given to us as part of the session that we ourselves were wondering where to take this. Do we talk about valor? Do we talk about leadership? Do we talk about all the different things that could be part of the conversation? 5 minutes ago, when we sat down to just introduce ourselves to each other, it became very obvious that the thing that concerned everybody really was leadership. And all the other things tied into that idea of leadership. The good general there has several strong ideas about leadership, and perhaps that's where we should begin. To talk about what is it that ails this country? Why is it that we just cannot get the leadership at the top that we really obviously need? There's something wrong. And what is that something wrong? How do we even begin to find the solution to that lack of leadership? Raghu has several theories about this in the way we approach our lives as private individuals versus the public person who doesn't really care what happens beyond 2 feet of his home or her home. And perhaps that's one of the things we need to talk about. Are we just different individuals when we're at home and outside? Do we not care? Is this thing about nationalism and patriotism and all the things that began and formed this country to start with, are they all dead and gone forever? Or is it just the usual problems, bureaucracy, lethargy, middle class apathy to anything that does not directly give them benefits? These are all, I suspect, the questions that everybody asks. And I don't think there are 3 more qualified people to talk about this from very different viewpoints. One who has actually used an individual to bring out the aspects of leadership, the other who has many theories about this from a very analytical, research-based point of view, and General Cardoza, who has lived his life in a way that spells leadership. So can we begin with you, General, to talk about what is it? What's the problem?
I think the basic problem is the antithesis of being bold. And I think we could call it the paradox of fear. People are afraid to do what is right. People are not afraid to do what is wrong. Today in this country, India can be the best country in the world. We have all human resources, all material resources. What we lack is leadership. And I don't have to tell you, all of us know what the hell is going on in this country. And the basic problem is, we're going to talk about Chanakya. Chanakya was an advisor to kings. He was a bureaucrat, but he was a bureaucrat like Sardar Patel. He advised kings as to what they should do and how they should do it. What is the bureaucracy doing today? So, being bold is, I think, the most important thing about being bold is having character. And in that, I think mothers play a great role. If you look at the people who have won the highest award for gallantry in the field, the Paramveer Chakra, it is the mothers who influence their children. My mother, when I was to join the National Defence Academy, told me, son, don't do anything which I will be ashamed of. And I think that stuck with me throughout. And therefore, we need to do what is right. We need to do what is right at the right time, in the right place, irrespective of the consequences. And I can tell you, the world is not that bad to condemn somebody who does the right thing. People will respect you. And I think, as far as character is concerned, there's so many qualities. But perhaps personal leadership, I'm talking from my own experience, is what is important. In the army, I fought 3 wars. I've been in the Chinese War, 65, 71. And we have what is called, what we say, follow me. We don't tell our soldiers, you go forward, I'm coming. We say, follow me. Officers are there right in front. In the 1971 war, my battalion started the war with 18 officers. And in 13 days, after 13 days, only 7 survived. 4 got killed and 7 got wounded. So the point is, unless a leader not only necessarily has to be bold, you have to set a personal example. I think that is and what is leadership? Each and every one of us has to lead. You may be a bus conductor, but you got to ensure that the aged and the women are treated properly. You've got to ensure the bus stops at the right place. You've got to ensure that women are not molested. You've got to ensure you have the right change to give. So, you can be a teacher, you can be a mother, you can be a prime minister, you can be anyone. But all of us have a role to lead. And that leadership, they say, some leaders are born, some leaders are trained, and some have leadership thrust upon them. But even a born leader has to be trained. And therefore, training, whether in school or in the academy or wherever, training is important. And training to do the right thing at the right time, it must become your attitude, your behavior, your reactions, your responses to difficult situations have to be automatic. And that only happens if every day you live your leadership, by personal example. You live every day, your small battles you have every day to do the right thing or the wrong thing. If you do the right thing all the time, when war comes, when there's a battle, automatically your reflexes will be right. Similarly, in our daily lives, when the challenge comes, you will automatically do the right thing. So that's the little I want to say. I don't want to take everybody else's time. So this is what I want to say about my initial thoughts about leadership and being bold.
Right. In the army, is it important to have charismatic leadership, or is it the system that anyway runs along and it doesn't really matter if the person at the top is not someone who's inspirational?
Yeah, for the young officer, it's good to have a colorful senior leader. A chap who is, as she says, charismatic, who doesn't bother about rules. Don't throw the rule book at people. Apply your mind. And if you're colorful, the young officers, the Jawans, are looking forward to somebody who can be different. If you are going to be a Lakir ka Fakir and just follow what you're taught and you're not going to be different, people gravitate to a leader who is bold, who is colorful, and who doesn't bother about what people say. He doesn't bother what people think. He does the right thing in the right way, and that way can be colorful. That is what charisma is all about.
I wouldn't have thought you were talking about the army when you said that. I thought it was all about the rule book and you had to follow in line, but obviously it's not. So can I move to Mr. Pillai, who has worked on a book called Corporate Chanakya, who has published a book called Corporate Chanakya, where he uses the principles of Chanakya to tell us how leadership can actually be worked on and attained as a quality. Which of course is slightly problematic because one, you're looking at somebody who was alive in a very different context many, many years ago. So are you saying that there are all these universal principles that you can just pull out and put into another context and leadership doesn't change? And also that subtext of any leader who is overwhelmingly a leader, do you then drift down the path to surrender and then say, okay, we don't mind a Modi as Prime Minister?
You started with this whole concept of Chanakya, and this was my challenge when I started researching and doing my PhD in the area of Arthashastra. And the same question came to me saying that somebody who lived 2004 years ago in a monarchy system is creating a king called Chandragupta Maurya, but how is it relevant to me in 2013 onwards? And then I've been in the field of leadership, and when I say I'm in the field of leadership, it's in various dimensions. So one is basically, of course, the book that I have written. I run a leadership academy in the University of Mumbai, so it's a leadership academy. Then I speak, I train people, etc., etc. And I've been getting a lot of dimensions about Chanakya. So to answer your question, if you look at leadership, there are two aspects of it. One is what kind of a leadership you are having on that specific role, and the second is the attitude. Now let me define that. So let's say Ratan Tata is a leader of a corporation. Let's say Mahendra Singh Dhoni, leader of cricket, If you look at somebody in the armed forces, yeah, Manik Shah, one of the most leaders. So their fields are different. And interestingly, it is not necessary that if you switch the roles, they will succeed. So tell Dhoni probably to lead the Tata Group of Company or vice versa. So one, we are talking about the skill sets and techniques which are specifically required in that particular field. It may not be relevant in the other field. But what is very important, as you mentioned, is the universal principles of leadership that doesn't change with time. For example, what is an ideal king according to Chanakya? In the Arthashastra, the first book defines a very beautiful chapter, and it calls a leader as Raja Rishi. Raja hai, but Rishi bhi hai. What does it mean? And when I recently went to Germany, where we were part of the World Philosophy Congress, I drew a parallel to what Chanakya spoke in India in actually Greece. If you remember, for them the philosophers were Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. They speak about a concept called philosopher king, which is Indriya Jaya and all those things. So what happens is that, coming back, we are talking about leadership qualities which are eternal, but we are also talking about leadership skills that are required in every industry and generation separate. So one is, yes, you need to have those technical skills to run the company. If you are a businessman, to how to, profit and loss accounts, your etc. etc. But the attitude finally matters. So in the Arthashastra, coming back, there are two dimensions of leadership. One is what a leader should do. These are the qualities you should develop. The second most important part, which most of us don't speak about, is what a leader should not do. And I think most of the challenge is this leader, I gave my life to this company or this organization and kicked me out, or, it did not give me the right promotion. In fact, in the corporate Chanakya, one of the most talked about, or rather people only give their feedback is, I like those 10 chapters where Chanakya says, don't do this, 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 and it appeals to me. For example, strength of character. I think you may make a lot of profits for the company, but if you're not a good boss to your subordinates, that also comes from character.
Do you want to pick up on that, Raghu, and tell us where you stand on this?
I approach the whole idea of leadership from what General was saying, doing the right thing. So the framework that I often use to understand what you may call as the Indianness of the Indians, are we good leaders intrinsically or not? I use what in management theory is called the game theoretic framework, which is the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is a very simple dilemma. Supposing the general and I, as accomplices, have been caught in some crime, and we are put in the locker, but we are put in two separate lockers, and the cop comes to the general and says, we are going to give you a plea bargaining opportunity. We have enough evidence to put both of you away for 2 years. But if you sing on Raghu, we will let you go scot-free and give 5 years to Raghu. But they also tell the general, we are making an identical offer to Raghu in his chamber, but the two of us can't talk. I am also made an identical offer that, look, we are both, first of all, assume that we are both supremely selfish. All that counts is minimum time for myself. So I am also offered the same deal that if I sing on him, he gets 5 years, I walk scot-free. So then we wonder, we say, hey, hang on, if I sing on him and he sings on me, what happens? Then we are told, oh, sorry, in which case our hands are tied, under section such and such, each will get 4 years. Now, I am in a pickle. I say, if the general is going to sing on me, the best thing for me to do is sing right back on him. Why should he go scot-free and why should I take 5 years? So if he's going to sing on me, I should sing back on him. If he's not going to croak on me, it is still a good idea for me to croak on him because I will walk scot-free, he will get 5 years. But what is a good strategy for me is also a good strategy for the general. So he croaks on me, I croak on him, and each gets 4 years at the end of it. While theoretically, there was an opportunity for both of us to get only 2 years each. That is because I didn't do the right thing by friends. He didn't do the right thing by friends. So collectively, we end up paying a bigger price. It's like saying, supposing in summer in Delhi, the water is coming only once in 2 days. And it just comes for 2 hours a day in a very thin trickle. Because your kids have to go to work very early in the morning or to the school, you have this bright idea of fitting a little pump to the tap so that you'll get a better pressure. Now, because you have put a pump, the trickle in the next door is thinner still. So that guy listens to this whirring noise next door, looks at that, says, wow, so let me also fit a pump. The next neighbor, oh my God, these two have put a pump, let me put a pump too. So before you know it, the whole Delhi has spent 5,000 bucks each but the water is back to the same trickle. Now this tendency where we are privately very smart, but publicly we come out very dumb because no one is doing the right thing by himself or herself, is the failure of leadership. So I think that's the framework where I picked up a whole lot of examples trying to show, how we take decisions vis-a-vis how students internationally elsewhere take decisions. And finally, I link this, for instance, to dharma. Karmanya vadhikarastu ma phaleshu kadachana, or when Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. If I don't want him to croak on me, I also should not croak on him, then we would have both got 2 years each. If he is not to put a pump, I should not put a pump first. So if I externalize the problem, I'll always be on the short wicket. But if I internalize the problem, doing the right thing, that's where I think what the general was saying makes enormous sense. We have to do what we want others to do, and there's a mathematical proof to it. This is called the Nash equilibrium, that beautiful mind, the movie that you might have seen. The Nash equilibrium is broken only when you think internally and not externalize the problem.
Yeah, this business about doing the right thing at the right time. I'd like to give you an example at what happened in the 1965 war. But it was now to stand up against the hierarchy, that is, he was only a lieutenant colonel, a battalion commander. He had to stand up to the brigade, the division, the corps and the command. Army and the Air Force all had made their plans for this battalion to go on a particular approach where they would have suffered very heavy casualties. So, what should he have done and what did he do? He decided to say, I am sorry, I'm not going to attack on this approach. I would like to attack on another approach. They said, you can't do that. We made all our plans, everything is fixed. He said, you want my body in the body of my men? So be it. But if you want us to capture the objective, let me do it my way. We did it our way. We went behind the enemy. We captured the feature and at very few casualties. And it came in the Time magazine. The Pakistani battalion commander ran away leaving his trousers behind. So the question is, are you prepared to take on the establishment and do what you think is right, irrespective of the consequences? So I think that's important. And ultimately, to be bold, I want to ask you a question. Is it better to be an army of sheep led by a lion or an army of lions led by a sheep? And the answer is, it's better to be an army of sheep led by a lion, because that lion will lead those sheep to do what needs to be done. But if you have an army of lions and the leader is indecisive, then I'm sorry, we won't achieve results. And I think we can look at what is happening in India today.
I'll just add something quickly to what I was saying with the defense forces. You see, the same game theoretic framework that we were talking about, you see, India thinks we are very smart. If Pakistan doesn't have an atom bomb, we must have the atomic power. But if Pakistan has an atomic bomb, then also we should have an atom bomb to have a counter to them. But what is good strategy for us is also good strategy for Pakistan. Now you may call it atomic power or build up of conventional warfare or whatever. But in the process, we build up and they build up. Money that could have been spent for poverty reduction, for better health and so on, gets spent on warfare. Now, so this game theoretic framework actually applies in a variety of situations in terms of international polity, in terms of individual behavior, why we dump our garbage outside our door, why we jump the red lights, why we jump the queue, because we think it's a good strategy for me, but every Indian thinks it's a good strategy for him, so nobody wants to stand in the queue at all, everybody is jumping all over the place.
I'm going to address a different problem of leadership. The first challenge is to become a leader, but the next challenge is to maintain leadership. And it's a very interesting dimension, especially that comes in the Chanakya's teachings, that you got the position, you are there, okay, you need to be better, but there is something called as sustainability in leadership. Let me give a very simple example. Dhoni, the most successful captain in Indian cricket, blah, blah, blah. But the question is that, what next? Can we go on and on and on? So there is a solution in the Arthashastra which I'm able to actually relate to Indian leadership scenario. We talked about the political leaderships, etc., etc. And the typical word that we talk about is 75% of India is young, and 25% is old, and we need to have the young boys and girls coming out and taking up the leadership position. But I think we are only looking at one dimension of it. Do you know that 25% sitting over there is rich with experience? When we say that yes, 75% of the youth have to move on to the leadership, what happens to the remaining 25% who are still going to be healthy and alive for the next 20 years? Think about it. The average lifespan of Indians have started going up. What we don't realize is that in leadership, the leader has to be continuously in connection with a think tank which is still around. For example, I was discussing with Ayaz, right from the time we took the same flight. Ayaz is a great cricket writer, and he's been a think tank in the cricket space. And he told me something very insightful. He said, I've seen so many World Cups. 8 World Cups, 6 World Cups. Not only cricket, also football and whatnot. And then, when Ayaz says something to a cricketer, as an upcoming cricketer, a leadership cricketer, I think that's wisdom of so many generations put together. So Chanakya says, I'll just talk about 2 concepts. It's called Vriddha Sanyogaha. Vriddha is not just old, it's rich and experienced person. Sanyog, be in touch with those people. So, as a youngster, I wouldn't call myself a youngster. I'm neither old, neither young. So, somewhere in Beach Ka Trishul. So, I say, what's the best way to teach the young boys in our institution? We say, we'll get older people who are retired, but nobody goes to them. But they'll share you the experience. The Vriddha Sanyoga is the king has to be continuously in touch with wiser people surrounded with think tanks. Interestingly, 70% of the time of a king in his daily timetable is dedicated to taking advices from Vriddhas. 70% is not a small time in a king's timetable, the most busiest man. The second concept I would say is that, हिंदी में अगर कहा जाए तो दुनिया में 3 तरह के लोग होते हैं. पहले गलतियां करके सीखते हैं, दूसरे गलतियां करते रहते हैं फिर भी नहीं सीखते, तीसरे दूसरों की गलतियों से सीखते हैं. So I'm sure the next army general could easily benefit and not make the same mistake which Sir did. So for me, I think it's continuous learning, continuous evolution, but most important leadership space is to learn from the leaders of the past and present who may be still retired.
You mentioned Sardar Patel, and I was reminded of this article that Gopal Gandhi wrote the other day, saying that the reason why Sardar Patel has suddenly become somebody to appropriate for various reasons that not everybody is in agreement with is primarily because the people who should have appropriated him did not appropriate him. The Congress ignored him. They were so busy doing the Nehru legacy that they forgot Patel. And so somebody else can come along and say, oh, Patel is for us to use in a way we want. So it's not just about the leader, it's about the people who can choose, who can keep that leader going as the leader. And how do you then make that relationship centric to it? You can't just be a leader and leave the rest to God and fate.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought in Sardar Patel. Pandit Nehru was a visionary, but he just couldn't take a decision on Jammu and Kashmir. And various inputs came to him, and he kept dithering. He wanted to go to the UN, he wanted to do this, he wanted to do that. Sardar Patel just told him, Jawaharlal, do you want to take Kashmir or not? And that is how a decision was taken. So the question is, Sardar Patel was, as they call him, the Iron Man. And he was not afraid to take decisions. He didn't bother about earning brownie points with the world. Unfortunately, today, India is bothered about what other people think. We are bothered about globalization when the market is here in India. The whole world is coming to India, and we are bothering about global strategy. Fine, global strategy has its place. But what about India? Country first. In the NDA and the IMA we are taught, the security, honor and welfare of your country come first always and every time. The security, honor and welfare of the menu command come next. Your own comforts and security come last, always and every time. This is what we should think about our own country. Country first, people next, self last. And I'd like to give a nice example to the ladies who are here. My battalion, I belong to the Gurkhas. For the first time in the history of India, in military history, we had a woman doctor coming to an all-male battalion. And that battalion was in Jammu. And the battalion had to go to the valley. And the hierarchy said, no, she will not go. So she said, why? I'm a doctor like anybody else. I'm in uniform. I have a job to do. Please let me go. But the hierarchy were taking counsel of their fears. They said, what would happen if she becomes a casualty? The press would have a field day fixing the army. The question is, the media will publish, if you do something wrong, they will publish. If you do something right, they will also publish. Why do we take counsel of our fears? So she came to me, I'm sorry to talk about myself. I interacted with all the hierarchy and I said, this girl can make history. Let her go. She went, she worked under fire, and she is the first woman, perhaps in the world, but certainly in India, who won a gallantry award in the valley. So the thing is, be bold and be real. And to be real is what happened to Sam Manekshaw. When Pakistan, West Pakistan took over East Pakistan, and you know what happened. 10 million refugees came to India. And Indira Gandhi told Sam, I want you to march into East Pakistan. And he said, Madam, have you read the Bible? So Swaran Singh said, what is the Bible got to do with this? So he said, in chapter 1 Genesis, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And you are saying, let there be war. Sorry, I'm not ready. So she said, what do you want? She said, I want time. If you ask me to go now, in the month of April, in the month of June, the rivers in Bangladesh will become seas. The land will become marsh, all my tanks will get bogged down. Give me time. How much time do you want? Till November. And you know what happened. We won a great victory. We took 93,000 prisoners. So the question is, be bold, but be real. He had the guts to tell the Prime Minister, sorry, if you want me to do it now, my resignation is on your table tomorrow morning. So the question is, we have to be bold, but we also have to be real.
We had a great session. In the opening remark, you said that leaders can be born, leadership can be thrust upon. But how about leadership? Can that be learned, and how?
In fact, usually it's positions which are thrust upon people, not leadership. Take our own Prime Minister. The Prime Ministership has been bestowed upon him, but he is not a natural leader in the conventional sense of the word. But let me tell you what is my understanding of leadership being thrust upon somebody. There is a very interesting parallel example to the story that the general was saying. I was listening to a talk by a gentleman called Mark Inglis. He has climbed the Mount Everest. He doesn't have legs at the knees. Okay. Now, his story is something very interesting. He was a mountaineer in 1980s, in the mid-80s, and he is a New Zealander who was practicing in the southern tips of New Zealand at a 3,000 meter peak where the cold Antarctic winds recreate the conditions of 8,000 meters of the Himalayas. And one afternoon, during an afternoon climb, as he had gone up when he had both the legs intact, and just as they were coming down, there was once in a centurial kind of a rare 130 miles gale. And the two of them, he plus a colleague, there was a crevasse to the extent of these two chairs together. They had 6 biscuits between them and no sleeping bag or anything of the kind. And the gale lasted 13 days. His colleague died of exposure. And 13 days later, when for 4 hours the wind stopped, a chopper came looking, and he was in his last leg, and when he opened his eyes, he had been amputated on both the knees. And he says, I could either cry about it forever or learn to walk. He had a friend who was a mechanical engineer. He asked him to use, the latest carbon fiber kind of material or tungsten and so on to make artificial legs, and he started walking. He said, once I walked, I said, that's not good enough. I should be able to jog, otherwise I was putting on weight. So I learned to jog. Then he asked his friend, why don't you change my, the foot part? So I want to cycle. And he finally became a silver medalist in Paralympics. During this period, he got a PhD in biotechnology, became a professor of biotechnology, became a winemaker, started an NGO for paraplegics. But the beauty during his talk was he puts a picture there of a mountaineer with 2 artificial limbs on the mountain. And he asks people, what do you see there? And people were struggling. They said, oh, we see a mountaineer. Somebody said mountaineer with artificial legs or a paraplegic mountaineer. He says, no, I see a mountaineer who will never ever get a frostbite. So that is leadership being thrust upon out of adversity. Maybe this wouldn't have come out had he not had that accident. In that sense, it's leadership thrust upon him. And he made a very interesting statement. If you fall from 10 feet, you take 2 months to mend your legs. I take 2 hours and I'm back again, so I'm better off. So he's looking at the best side of the worst situation, and I think that is what leadership is all about, and that is the leadership being thrust upon somebody. It is not the Manmohan Singh kind of leadership being thrust upon. Only the position can be thrust upon, not leadership.